Here is the story behind the name of my channel. One day, I was innocently reading Wikipedia. I was. Until I started reading the biography of Caroline Herschel. A young, short, frail woman with white hair, wig, moves country to be a maid for his brother. They spend the better part of 2 decades together, gazing at stars during cold, lonely nights. When Oni-chan marries, she moves out and burns her diaries only about this period. She has the mother of all catfights going on with the wife of his brother for decades. What kind of half-assed hentai plot is this? Caroline Lucretia Herschel was born in 1750 in Hanover, the 8th of 10 children in a family of modest means, and even more modest expectations for its daughters. After surviving a bout of typhus as a child that stunted her growth, losing vision in one eye and only growing to 4'3", or 1.3 meters, her mother all but gave up on her future. No marriage prospects, no formal education, just a life of domestic service. Her mother expected her to become a live-in servant when she grows up. The Herschels were not a uniform household. Her father, a retired military musician, taught her to read and do basic math in secret. Her brothers, especially William, snuck her into lessons and nurtured her growing curiosity. The family may have been ruled by a practical, survival-focused mother, but it was also quietly subversive. Caroline moved from Hanover to Bath in her early 20s, not to pursue music, not even science, but to live as William's live-in maid. A huge leap across countries and languages. As one expects, she worked as a housemaid for her brother. William was already established as a music teacher, organist, and composer. Music also became her entrance into a public-facing life. William trained her as a soprano, and she performed in his concerts. She was, by contemporary accounts, quite good. The astronomy came later. William, as a result of his interest in astronomy, developed a side hobby of telescope building, gradually turned into an obsession. Keep in mind, this wasn't some whiplash-inducing career swerve, not any more so than a modern theoretical physicist jumping ship to apply their math skills at a quant fund like Renaissance Technologies. At the time, planetary resonances had only recently been discovered. Musical harmonies and celestial mechanics were still seen as deeply connected. So for someone trained in music, shifting from chords to orbits wasn't entirely out of tune. Caroline initially helped out with the practical stuff, grinding mirrors, recording observations, organizing notes. According to her own later writings, she was reluctant at first, feeling she was being dragged from a promising singing career into her brother's dusty mirror dungeon. But over time, she grew to genuinely enjoy astronomy and began to make independent contributions, including comet discoveries and deep sky object cataloguing. It wasn't an immediate pivot from oppressed housemaid to astronomy icon. It was more like music career with brother, slowly sucked into mirror polishing hell, gradual conversion to astronomy nerd, eventually made legit scientific contributions and got formal recognition, rare for anyone at the time, let alone a woman. From her letters, she came to enjoy it, but the work, the collaboration, and the daily closeness all came before any public acclaim. Caroline Herschel wasn't some lonely, candlelit prisoner scratching at the edges of genius in secret. She was, in fact, running William Herschel's household like a naval quartermaster. She cooked, she cleaned, she scheduled his music students, and she polished telescope mirrors, helped with observations, and later began making her own. By all accounts, including her own, she was a deeply involved assistant and collaborator, not some sidelined victim. When William's astronomical discoveries started catching the right aristocratic eyes, and King George III offered him a royal salary, Caroline was granted a stipend of her own, £50 a year. Now, by modern standards, that's not much. Barely a good bottle of wine and a modest existential crisis. But back then it was huge. Not just for a woman, but for anyone outside the upper crust. Getting paid to do astronomy in the 18th century was like being handed a small, royal version of a Nobel Prize, plus tea duty. She wasn't just allowed to do science, she was funded to do it. By the time William, 16 years later, married Mary Pitt, a well-off widow with her own assets and social standing, Caroline was already well established in the household. She kept the accounts, ran the meals, oversaw the astronomical schedule, and on occasion, discovered entire celestial objects. She had a room, a telescope, and a stipend, everything short of a title. In theory, this marriage should have changed very little for her, except perhaps upgrading the linens and reducing her grocery stress. A wealthier household could mean better instruments, more time for science, fewer distractions. Mary Pitt's marriage to William introduced a new dynamic to the Herschel household, one that many modern tellings treat like a dramatic exile, a cruel removal of Caroline from her rightful place. Within months of the marriage, the tone of Caroline's letters turns acidic. She moves out, not far, but far enough to make a point. She writes about feeling sidelined, displaced. The cozy scientific partnership appearing in letter becomes more emotionally sterile. And while she continues to work, and even to thrive scientifically, the emotional center of gravity has shifted. Was it jealousy? A loss of status? The end of their odd, close-knit sibling dynamic? Or just the awkward tension of a third person entering a space that had, until then, been entirely theirs? Or was it something even less palatable? We don't know. But what we do know is this. Caroline wasn't pushed out by patriarchy. She wasn't exiled by a jealous wife. She wasn't crushed under the weight of systemic dismissal. She left. She moved out and took her instruments and burned all her diaries from that era, left us with only publicly available, filtered correspondence. And she stayed bitter toward William's wife for years, until William's death, when suddenly they reconciled. What we don't know is just as telling as what we know, because while we do have letters, formal, factual, sometimes bristling with passive aggression, we're missing something far more intimate, her diaries. Around the time Caroline moved out, she systematically destroyed the journals from her previous 16 years in England, years that included her transition from musician to scientist, her time as William's closest collaborator, and yes, the marriage. They're gone, burned, and Caroline Herschel was unlikely to be the sort of person to burn things lightly. This was a woman who catalogued celestial coordinates with the precision of a surveyor. She was, in every scientific sense, a chronicler, a documentarian of the night sky. Whimsical diary burning is not in her psychological profile. Which leads us to the uncomfortable but inescapable conclusion. She destroyed evidence. And that missing voice, that self-censored past, left behind a vacuum. One that later historians were all too eager to fill, with a cleaner story, a simpler narrative. But what if, just what if, historical storytelling ran into one of its old traps? What if the myth of Caroline Herschel, like the countless other stories we've heard about notable women from the 18th and 19th centuries, ended up becoming yet another variation of that classic narrative? The Sappho and her surely platonic gal-pal tale. You know the one. The narrative that insists certain relationships, certain dynamics, must be completely innocent, completely above board, because that's what the story is supposed to be. That's how we prefer to see the past. Neatly wrapped, safely categorized, inoffensive to the sensibilities of our own time. And let's be real, these were contemporaries of Lord Byron. Bad, mad, and dangerous to know. The man who lived, loved, and acted in ways we'd find hard to stomach even today. So why then should we assume that Caroline and her circle were any less passionate, complex, or human? Let's rewind. Not to Caroline's discoveries, or even her stargazing, but to before all of that. Caroline Herschel was 22 when she made a very strange decision. She left her home in Hanover, left her mother, left her country, and crossed into England, a far-off land whose language she didn't even speak. She moved to Bath, where her older brother William had set himself up 6 years ago. And what did she go there to do? Be his housekeeper. That's it. Not to study, not to perform, not to chase dreams or escape danger. She just moved countries to be a maid. And that's weird. Let's not pretend this was normal. You didn't cross borders in the 18th century to get the same kind of job you could find 3 streets down. The whole idea that she made such a massive life leap just to fold laundry and scrub floors for her brother, it doesn't track. It's too much, for too little. Unless, of course, there was something else going on. If Caroline and William had a romantic or sexual relationship, one that could never be openly acknowledged, then suddenly the decision makes a lot more sense. She didn't go to Bath for the job. She went for him. The job was just the excuse. Of course, we could say that this was just a coincidence, a quirk of history, a whimsical decision by a young woman with few prospects. People do strange things after all. Maybe she just really wanted a change of scenery. Maybe she liked tea. And for a while after these events, the officially taught narrative almost holds up, because for 16 years, nothing particularly scandalous happened. There were a few letters that read a bit strangely by modern standards, emotional, intense. But hey, 18th century people were into big feelings. We could chalk it all up to the flowery prose of the era, just vibes, just affectionate siblings. But then came the marriage. William Herschel married a rich widow. Great news, right? More money for the household, less financial pressure, more hands to do the chores, better dinners maybe. By every rational measure, Caroline's life should have improved. But it didn't. Shortly after the wedding, everything imploded. We don't know what triggered it. Did the new Lady Herschel get suspicious? Did she level accusations? Did she catch them in the act? Did the masks slip? We have no idea. We can only speculate based on surviving data. The feud between Mary and Caroline didn't start while William was courting Mary. Stuff didn't blow up around the time of marriage. Everything happened months later. It's hard to find a morally upstanding justification that makes logical sense. Caroline not only burns her notes and diaries, she also moves out, which at least makes sense. What makes no sense at all is where she moves. Not back to Hanover, not to London, not even other side of the town. Caroline didn't vanish after William's marriage. She set up nearby, close enough to walk over each day, telescope glass in tow. It was no grand house, just a modest lodge, one you could spot across the street, and continues her working collaboration with William as usual, observing stars late into the nights. And the animosity only ends after William's death, when Caroline takes a deep interest in educating his son, as if he were a child she couldn't bear. We try to avoid drawing certain conclusions. We tiptoe around the idea that there could have been more between them than sibling affection. But then again, we have no problem talking openly about Lord Byron fathering a child with his half-sister. So why do we flinch at the Herschels? Because it's messier when scientists do it? Because they were supposed to be paragons of rationality? If we stop dodging and start actually looking, things start to make sense. A deep emotional codependence, an abrupt fallout at the point of disruption, William's marriage, a scorched earth diary purge, years of estrangement, and finally, grief as shared reconciliation. That doesn't sound like a professional rift. It sounds like heartbreak. If you've ever spent time around people of science, you know they're still human. Sometimes brilliantly so. Sometimes morally sideways. I mean, Feynman was a strip club sketch artist. Einstein dumped his wife to marry his cousin, while cheating on both. And Schrödinger kept a diary about his relationships with teenage students that would get anyone else cancelled yesterday. In that context, the Herschels? They're downright wholesome. But only if you can set aside the modern black and white moral goggles we inherited from Protestant America, just for a moment, just as a thought experiment. Let's try on a different moral lens entirely. Say, the blue and orange ethics of Roman Egypt. That's a society where, according to surviving census data, 15% of married couples were first-degree relatives. Viewed from that world, William and Caroline Herschel would have been model citizens. a faithful, productive, high-status couple of royal astronomers, bringing cosmic fortune to the god-emperor/pharaoh. Sure, the wife is tragically infertile, scarred by childhood illness, but their union, exemplary, something to aspire to. I guess some people would still like to come at me with standard of extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and they would be correct, were it not for my claim not being anything but ordinary. While the suggestion might sound strange, but Corn Pub offers something rarely found. Get your head outer gutter. I mean, its yearly insights posts about what kind of erotic content people are interested in. Well, dear listener, if you gather your courage and visit that wretched hive of scum and villainy, you will find that one or another type of incestuous fetish is always present in the top 10. Except for France, but we all know what's going on there. As such, some people indulging a relatively common, albeit immoral, carnal desire shouldn't be some extraordinary claim. I mean, people do way wilder things than living in a quiet, monogamous relationship with someone they shouldn't be with. Regardless if we are talking a Catholic priest and his housekeeper, or these two. And just to be clear, when a Catholic priest takes a lover, it isn't just breaking the rules. It's betraying a vow of lifelong celibacy that defines his entire vocation. To the faithful, it's not like cheating on a diet. It's like breaking the sacrament itself. If we're being honest about human behavior, if you had two people, one man, one woman, both sexually functional, emotionally codependent, living together in privacy for nearly 2 decades with no outside partners, and then one has a sudden breakdown when the other marries. In any other historical context, we would assume they were physically involved. And I have one last, uncomfortable little hunch. If Caroline Herschel was, as one could suspect, infertile, due to typhus, to stunted development, to whatever quiet biological switch was never flipped, then maybe, just maybe, that too changed the moral math. Because in a world where pregnancy meant ruin, inheritance, scandal, evidence, the absence of that possibility might have felt like a kind of permission. No risk, no proof, no child. Just two brilliant people, orbiting each other in a system of their own design. At the end of the day, all we are left with is scraps. Letters, gaps, silences, and choices that make no sense unless you read between the lines. We are, after all, talking about responsible, rational scientists. People who, like any rational person in their situation, would have cleaned up the evidence, burned the diaries, removed the mess. So all we really have, officially, is the story of a brilliant woman and her devoted brother, living together, working together, bound by shared genius and mutual respect. Just like Sappho and her good, close, definitely platonic gal pal. Or maybe they weren't. In lieu of evidence, we can never know for sure. We still shouldn't pretentiously cling to made-up icons of saints. There is no such thing as a prophet or saint of science.